So the last week for Assassin's Creed has been among the weirdest in the history of the franchise, and frankly, it's been fascinating to watch. I've been talking about this over on my second channel, Luke Stevens Live, where I stream and do stream highlights, blah, blah, blah. You've heard it all before. But while we were trying to unravel what was going on, there were all sorts of reports coming out that just further confused the issue. In case you missed it, there were initial reports from Tom Henderson that Ubisoft was canceling press previews of Assassin's Creed Shadows at the very last minute, which is pretty bizarre. That doesn't really happen. As you can see, he says that according to various sources, the AC Shadows press previews were scheduled to take place next week, and the embargo date for those previews would be announced then, probably relatively soon after that. And so to cancel that at the very last minute, when people are probably packing their bags to go to this event, is pretty interesting. I can't think of a time that that's happened for other games, at least that we've heard about through leaks and stuff, so that's crazy. Then it was announced that they were canceling their appearance at Tokyo Game Show, and you could probably hand wave away one of these things. Like if they announced that they were just backing out of Tokyo Game Show, you could maybe say, the demo they had was having issues, or maybe they didn't think that the trailer they cut was that good, so they canceled it, or maybe there's some legal issue on the side that is just not worth delving into. You could maybe excuse it that way. But when there's two instances back to back like this, the smoke starts to fill the room. And often where there is smoke, there is fire. And that fire was confirmed this morning. Ubisoft Corporate posted this. It is a revision to financial targets. Basically, this is something that happens when a big corporation is changing the outlook for investors. So for example, when Take-Two Interactive moved the expected release window for GTA 6 out of this fiscal year into the next one, they had all sorts of last minute bookings, adjustments, and they tempered, quote unquote, expectations for revenue because they were relying on this game generating billions of dollars. And once they move it to a different fiscal year, now they have to tell investors that that's not going to happen. And that's basically what happened here with AC Shadows. They outline how they're moving things around and that they are expecting net bookings to be significantly lower than they previously stated. And they say the revised targets are mainly a reflection of decisions taken for Assassin's Creed Shadows and the softer than expected launch for Star Wars Outlaws. Listening to players' feedback and as an illustration of our player-centric approach, the following important decisions relative to AC Shadows have been taken. Okay, we get 3 points that are each pretty significant. For one, Assassin's Creed Shadows will now be released on Valentine's Day, February 14th of 2025, being delayed out of the November launch window into the spring. While the game is feature complete, the learnings from the Star Wars Outlaws release led us to provide additional time to further polish the title. This will enable the biggest entry in the franchise to fully deliver on its ambition, notably by fulfilling the promise of our dual protagonist adventure with Naoe and Yasuke, bringing two very different gameplay styles. So right away, they are saying, based on the launch of Star Wars Outlaws, we see that having bugs, having crappy AI that's broken and busted in certain missions, that doesn't work. We can't just hand wave that away. And there's other revelations we'll just say later on that I'll get to in a minute, which are very, very telling. But I think that this is fascinating. They are saying last minute, we've just decided that we can't do this the way that we did with Star Wars Outlaws. We have to polish it and get it where it needs to be, frankly. We can't rely on goodwill to carry the day here, which is fascinating. The second point, we are departing from the traditional season pass model. I didn't see this coming. All players will be able to enjoy the game at the same time on February 14th, and those who pre-ordered the game will be granted the first expansion for free. This is a change because prior to this, they were doing the early access thing where you buy the whatever pre-order season pass, whatever, and you get early access to the game maybe by 3 to 5 days, and then you get some other bonus stuff. They are moving away from that and instead releasing the game full stop for everybody on the same day. This to me seems like a direct response to the problems they had with Star Wars Outlaws, where the game became open for early access on August 27th, but it didn't officially launch until August 30th. However, they ran into a problem where basically there was a progress bug where you couldn't continue the game, and to fix it, you had to delete your save file. So people were playing Star Wars Outlaws, having pre-ordered it for early access, and having to delete their save files and restart the game before it even technically launched, which is it's a pretty funny bug, let's be honest. It's pretty stupid, but that seems to be probably why they are taking this step. And then the third point is crazy. The game will mark the return of our new releases on Steam day one. They are not going to be doing Ubisoft Plus launcher or whatever it's called day one, where you got to buy it there if you want to play. They are trying to remove the barriers, just put it up on Steam. Even though people are probably going to mass downvote it and rate it poorly, they're putting it up there because they need to remove as many barriers to entry as possible. They also outlined some other stuff, like they are responding to player feedback by mobilizing huge teams to work on refining the game, Star Wars Outlaws specifically, to be a strong long-term performer, and they're going to be launching that on Steam in November, mid to late November as well. And this is not the only time that a big company has chosen to forego their own launcher to bring games to Steam on PC day one. Most notably, like Dragon Age the Veilguard, they are not requiring the EA launcher to play that game. Even if you buy it on Steam, it doesn't do that weird thing where it boots to the EA launcher, which is like broken half the time, and then launch the game. It just launches the game. And I hope this is like the new trend where we just get over all of this weird fragmented launcher crap and we just have like platforms which are competitive. You can buy the game where you want to, but if you buy the game on this platform, that's where you're choosing to spend your money. You don't have to jump through all these hoops of like booting up 2 different launchers to get to the game. You know, it's just, I bought the game. Let me just play the game. Why? Like, what are we doing? So having said that, the delay, okay, that explains maybe why like the media events have been delayed or canceled or whatever. And then that also explains why like Tokyo Game Show, that was canceled as well. But it still is baffling because they already spent millions preparing for those preview events. They already spent tons of money on marketing materials that they probably have to reprint. I imagine they were going to do like posters and murals and whatever stuff to market the game. And all of that is down the drain. So something happened in the last week where executives were so freaked out that they chose to lose those millions in favor of delaying the game into February, which is already pretty stacked. I mean, we've got Kingdom Come, we've got Avowed, we've got Monster Hunter now. It's going to be a busy, busy time, and they're kind of threading the needle with that February 14th date. So I'm so fascinated. Like, I want to know what they are seeing that freaks them out so much. Is it that pre-orders are like really, really bad, and so they're freaked out because they're like, Star Wars Outlaws had decent pre-orders and it just didn't go anywhere. What are we going to see with this? Is this going to be like a colossal flop? I mean, bear in mind, this game could reasonably have cost Ubisoft $400 to $600 million. I mean, they could have a Concorde and a half for that price. And there's the potential that this just launches and then there's no splash. It's just like a little bloop and that's it. And I don't think they can afford to do that. But Tom Henderson, the cheeky little fella, he managed to get his hands on a copy of the internal memo from the CEO of Ubisoft, Yves Guillemot, and he shared it. And, you know, there's always going to be corporate doublespeak in here, but what I find fascinating is that at one point in this memo, Yves Guillemot kind of says the quiet part out loud, the part that we all know, but the part that you wouldn't expect any executive to ever admit, even to his own teams. Let me show you. So he goes through Star Wars Outlaws, saying how they were happy with some of the reception, but they specifically had some issues, focused on save issues, stealth mechanics, more frequent quest checkpoints, and better NPC AI. I'm confident these updates will significantly improve the player experience, blah, blah, blah. He then says, in today's ultra-competitive market, players expect extraordinary experiences and ultra polished games on day one. I mean, I would say like polished, ultra polished. I think of like Rockstar. Like if there's a bug or two I run into, it's not the end of the world. But when like stealth sequences are broken or when I'm getting soft locked and I have to restart the console, like that is a problem, you know, I would say personally, but I don't think that would count as ultra polish, but what do I know? They continue. We need to continue to improve when it comes to fine-tuning our games and delivering outstanding gameplay. This is what will enable Ubisoft to again create the best games in the industry. Consequently, we decided to delay AC Shadows to February 14th of 25. The game is already playable and of high quality and has all the features the team wanted to integrate into this ambitious experience. This unusual decision at such an advanced stage is motivated by our desire to offer an optimal experience from launch on all platforms and various PC configurations, and to remove the small frictions we typically use to address in post-launch updates. And I find this fascinating. Remove the small frictions we typically used to address in post-launch title updates. So like they acknowledge that there are issues, that they've run into these frictions, and they would typically just fix those after the game launches. You know, it's not that big of a deal. We'll get to that after launch. We just need to get it good enough and then we'll put it out there. But it's pretty clear with Star Wars Outlaws, at the very least, they are not able to consistently figure out what is a small friction and what is a big issue. Because some of these things he outlines up here, such as save issues, stealth mechanics, frequent checkpoints, NPC AI, that stuff, I'm sure those were classified before Star Wars Outlaws launched as small frictions. You know, things will fix after the game launches, not a big deal. But down here, he's saying we just can't do any of that. We would typically fix that, remove the small frictions, but at the very least, they are not able to consistently figure out what is a small friction versus a serious issue that needs to be fixed. So now they're taking an approach to just polish the crap out of it before it launches to avoid any of those small frictions from being present. And I think this is good. Part of like evaluating the gaming industry is that we have to be fair. When somebody does something bad, we slap them on the wrist and we say, stop it. But when they do something good, such as delaying a game to polish it and get it better instead of rushing it out the door, that is a good thing. And we should praise them when they do that. I think this is good news, even though November, you know, I think probably would have been a better time for this to release in terms of sales leading into the holidays. From a business perspective, probably makes more sense to do it in November. The fact that they delayed it to February, I think shows, at the very least, a desire to avoid the mistakes of Star Wars Outlaws, which I'm all for. Less buggy games, less broken games, please bring it on. Like, preaching to the choir here. I love that. But he also references the elephant in the room, as it were, with Assassin's Creed Shadows, and that is all of the scandal surrounding Yasuke as a playable character. Lastly, I'd like to address the recent polarized coverage around our creative choices. Again, translation from corporate doublespeak. This basically just means referring to Yasuke, the playable character that has ticked a lot of people off because we've kind of pretended like it's super historically accurate when in reality we took like a little nugget and then expanded it into this whole thing, and then we just kind of danced around the issue, blah, blah, blah. That's what he's referring to. As such, our objective is not to endorse any specific agenda. We want to, you know, the fence, we want to sit right there. Our mission has always been to entertain players and enrich their lives with original and memorable experiences that resonate with a global audience. Now, translation of this, after all of it, I take this as them basically just saying, we don't like that you guys are so upset about this, and we're not trying to push any specific agenda, but we can kind of see how that could happen. We really just were trying to appeal to as large of an audience as possible, and we didn't think that this would get as much blowback as it has. The problem is, like, at this point, there is so much toxicity surrounding Assassin's Creed Shadows. I don't really know how they could dig themselves out of it without just ignoring that stuff and then just focusing on the game. It probably doesn't do crazy pre-order numbers. I'm sorry to tell you, Eve, I just don't see that really happening. I think it maybe if the game is really good, it has some legs, and over the next like 6 months to a year, it sells decently well. But I just think there's so much negativity around it. You're not going to see many YouTubers covering it. You're not going to be seeing many streamers playing it because they just don't want to deal with the drama. They don't want to deal with people coming into their comment section and flooding it with go woke, go broke stuff. They just don't want to deal with it. And so they're just not going to bother. Whether they agree or not, it's just an added stress that a lot of content creators, a lot of reviewers and journalists and news publications, they just don't want to have to mess with it. So they just won't. because you're not releasing the game in a dry period where there's nothing else to talk about. You're releasing it next to some other huge games that are going to have lots to talk about when it comes to them. So I think it's unfortunate that a choice to have like Yasuke as a samurai has turned into such a scandal, and that they've made such basic mistakes with the marketing or with how they framed this by having like the hip hop inspired music whenever Yasuke fights on screen. That type of stuff, easily avoidable. And frankly, I don't know how those mistakes even get made, but that's just where we are. That's where we are. It is so competitive in the industry, especially if you're Ubisoft. You cannot afford to make any of these mistakes. You cannot afford to launch your game like slightly buggy and then fix it later. You could have done that maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Nowadays, you just can't. Tolerance is at an all-time low. You can't do that. You know, right before I filmed this video, I was on my podcast, the Free Roam podcast. You should listen to it on Spotify or on YouTube, links below and everything. And I run that podcast with the one and only Joe Raptor, who does a lot of like Ubisoft focused coverage as well. And he had an interesting insight into all of this. To quickly summarize one of his key points that I thought was quite profound, he said that Ubisoft has had an approach after Assassin's Creed Valhalla where they assume that the players are going to come to them, and they don't really need to try that hard to win those players over. They just need to find a way to capitalize upon those players once they've arrived. And to support this, he pointed to Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which I know it's easy for people to forget, but AC Valhalla was huge. Yes, it was coming out of lockdowns and everything, but everybody was talking about that game. Everybody was eating it up. Everybody was excited to play as a Viking in basically a hack and slash open world adventure RPG. That sounded awesome. And even though I had lots of problems with the game, I did a multi-hour breakdown of why I think it is a mess in many, many ways. A lot of people were excited for it. A lot of people bought it just to try it and see what it had to offer. And I think that Ubisoft had the same idea with Shadows. They're like, even if there is some outrage or there are some scandals with it, I think people are going to suck it up and people are going to still buy it and we'll be fine. We'll just deal with the controversy and move on. But it seems as though executives at some point in the last week were made aware of some data, something or other, that freaked them out so bad they decided to pull the plug and delay everything. And again, I would just love to know what those metrics were. Are pre-orders that bad? Is it that there's some major issue or legal issue? I would just love to know. But I guess we'll just have to wait until the reporting comes. But after all of this, my main takeaway is that Ubisoft is in a bit of a panicked state. They are trying desperately to dig themselves out of this Assassin's Creed Shadows shaped hole they find themselves in, and they are trying to find ways to excite players once again. They're doing this by promising that they're going to be polishing the games, that they're going to take a more pro-consumer approach to how they time the release of their games, changing the seasonal pass structure away from pre-order bonuses and early access and stuff and shifting it more towards post-launch content, which I personally prefer over early access. I just think that's better. And they're also doing things like Steam Day 1 launching on PC, trying to throw gamers little bones that they can be excited over. And I think that those are all great first steps. But frankly, Ubisoft at this point needs to go the route of like BioWare with Dragon Age. They need to find ways to excite the player base again and to win them over, not assume that those gamers are going to show up and buy their games. You can't assume that anymore, especially not Ubisoft. They have to win players over from day one, and that might mean that you don't get to sell 15 cosmetics in the in-game store on launch day. Maybe you launch the in-game store a year after launch and you commit to people, no, we're focused on the game being really good. We're not going to monetize the inside of the game later. No XP boosts, none of this stuff. I really hope that they learn from these mistakes and they take that approach. Nobody's rooting for more like layoffs. Nobody's rooting, well, maybe some people are, but those people are nasty. But we should all be, in my opinion, rooting for these companies to figure their crap out, to have a redemption arc, to figure it out and to stop making these mistakes. Because we should all want more good games. We should all want more companies pumping out great stuff because it increases competition and that holds everybody's feet to the fire so that we get better and better games year in, year out. I miss the days when I could reliably count on Ubisoft games being awesome. I miss those days. It's been a while because it feels like nowadays you never really know what you're going to get. Are you going to get a quadruple A Skull and Bones, or are you going to get something really cool like Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown? You just don't really know what you're getting. And until they can figure out their processes, until they can figure out how to win player confidence back, they're going to keep having these issues. The problem is, I think they're running out of time. And I hope they figure it out, because Ubisoft has 20,000 employees, a lot of wonderful people who work their butts off. And unfortunately, it's just a few dozen executives that seem to be driving most of the difficulties Ubisoft has been faced with. And I think that's really unfortunate. So hopefully this marks a turning point, fingers crossed, but time will tell. Either way, it is fascinating to watch, because I cannot think of another time that a huge game like this from Ubisoft has been delayed at the last second under kind of mysterious circumstances without the rest of Ubisoft seemingly knowing what's going on. It is crazy. And as someone who eats up the drama, I love it. I can't get enough. It's like reality TV, but better. But that's it for me. Thank you for watching. I love you all. See you soon in the next one. Hugs and kisses. Bye-bye.